Most businesses only focus on growing and expanding, and they give little to no attention to their exit strategies until after exit is staring them in the face. Learn here at Boosting Business Value, brought to you by Blue Sky Business Resources. You'll discover how to shape a more durable and saleable business, and how to implement a powerful, well-planned, and rewarding exit. Join Dr. David Gruder and Jason Tazinkowicz as they deliver actionable tips for lower middle market company owners, executives, and their trusted advisors. Find out where your business currently stands, how you can meet your revenue objectives more reliably, and how to grow your venture to the next level, all with a smooth and fruitful exit in mind. Here are your hosts, Dr. David and Jason.
Welcome back. In this episode, we get to talk to our new friend and all-around amazing lady, Rache Brand. Rache believes in a better world and that we can do it better together. I have a whole bunch of things I'd love to say about her, but I think you'd rather hear it from the lady herself. So Rache, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, thanks, Jason. Thanks, David, for having me. This is so exciting. First, I've loved being able to have a conversation with Blue Sky, and I think we're very aligned in terms of how we like to work with businesses. So I'll just dig in. So my background's in food. I started as the drive-through girl at McDonald's when I was 14, and always from that moment forward kind of fell in love with the process of the food system. It's such a huge part of our lives. It's, 1/3 of greenhouse gases are attributable to something related to the food industry. It's also 1/3 of our day if we really think about, grocery shopping and planning and eating 3 square meals, feeding our families. So it's a big part of what I still do. But I also work in entrepreneurship and the credit market. So I switched over to finance kind of halfway through my career, and I still worked in the food industry as part of that. But today I am really excited to say that I'm fully diversified in my portfolio. I joined a small lending group in Connecticut in 2022, right post-pandemic. And today we are in the process of building out a fully diversified portfolio and raising fund too. So I'm here and very excited to chat with you both.
So great. I love your vision of melding food and business together to improve the communities in the ecosystem. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about your vision in a moment. For those of you who are new to the Boosting Business Value podcast, I'm Jason Tazinkowicz, Chief Operations Officer for Blue Sky Business Resources. And with me, as always, is my co-host, friend, and partner in crime, Dr. David Gruder, Blue Sky's business lifecycle, exit planning, and post-acquisition psychologist. And David, would you kick this conversation off for us?
It would help if I unmuted myself, wouldn't it?
Sometimes.
Well, absolutely. I'd be delighted to do that. And as we were talking briefly before starting to record this episode, what I saw, Rach, is that you have kind of an overarching vision that leads you into what you're focusing on in terms of food and financing mechanisms that you've got. And I'd love to start with the big picture. So say a bit about the kinds of the next wave of brands that you're supporting and why you're supporting that next wave. So say a little bit about the wave and why that's important to you to support.
Absolutely. Well, in terms of, the next wave overall, one of the things that I've identified as I've worked with brands is that most of the time, especially when you come into like a smaller business and you're just getting started, you're a founder, you have an idea, it's because of passion. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're rooted in business. So one of the things I love to do is think about the human condition as we kind of set out on a path together. I love connecting dots and figuring out who works with whom and who would be a better fit to potentially support this group. So I am definitely a connector. I would say that my greatest skill set is looking over the entire ecosystem and being able to figure out who should work with who and how they can best support each other. So as I move into this next kind of iteration of what I'm doing, part of why I ended up in a fully diversified portfolio is that I believe that we all really need to see what other groups are doing. And it's impossible to just be in your own industry and kind of keep your head down. You really need to look up and see all the things around you. So that's what I'm building today with my new business. It's called Superstruct.
Lovely. And Superstruct makes a lot of sense as a brand name based on what you were just saying. And, it seems to me, and you tell me if I'm tracking this right, that your vision is that there's so much more that businesses can do to be profitable while nourishing, protecting, and caring for our quality of life and offering new and improved opportunities for the betterment of human beings. And that kind of higher vision, bringing that higher vision into business is something that is very, very central to my values. And I know it's important to Jason's as well. How did you come to that vision in the first place? What sparked that for you after having started off at McDonald's, of all places?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Actually, I was a kid with lots of food allergies, and then I had like really weird food allergies, like citric acid, and nobody knew I was breaking out in a rash every time I had orange juice. But you start living your life, and everything is a part of that journey. So it doesn't matter which direction you end up going. Somehow those little life experiences are snowball effects into the person you become. So when I was 14, I realized when I started at McDonald's, what I loved about it was the process. I also loved that we had this like mass market that we could just, if we could incrementally move the needle just a little bit, we would have the opportunity to make really big change. And so I took that model throughout my life and everything that I was doing. So I'll kind of test out my theory on you and your audience and see what they think. But my higher belief is really my North Star, that we created Krispy Kreme donuts. We created type 2 diabetes. We created, big pharma to solve the solutions that type 2 diabetes created. And the reason why all of those things exist is because we had to have some capitalistic monetary exchange between each industry. My greater belief is that we can have actually that same dopamine effect from Krispy Kreme donuts without having all the effects of the other items. And we can actually have a wellness society as opposed to an illness society through helping to really transition people into wanting to be well and not having to fix something after they've had that dopamine lift. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what the product is. And that's where I've been searching. I've been really spending a lot of time working and talking to interesting entrepreneurs around the world. I do not have the answer today, but my goal in life is to break down the walls between food and healthcare and find a fit that everyone still makes money with, but ultimately benefits the person in the center, because that's the most important part. I mean, the world will survive us. There is no question in my mind that we are going to be the ones who will be endangered species at some point if we can't figure out a way to actually be well. So that's my life purpose. It's my North Star. It's what I wake up every morning trying to figure out. And I am on this path. So if anyone wants to connect with me, I'm down to discuss.
I just love this about you. And, I get so excited every time we talk, Rache, because, I too was a young restaurant employee and spent a lot of time in the space. I'm very passionate about food and production. I think we both would agree that the concept that ketchup is considered a vegetable in schools is unconscionable. And I love the fact that you're out there doing something about it.
Thanks. I don't know if I'm doing much yet, but I will tell you that it is amazing when you can see that very small incremental shift. So I was at the Food and Brand Lab at Cornell with Dr. Brian Wansink and his team. And it was simple shifts that he was making using language and also just removing the barriers that we don't consider, like putting white milk in front of chocolate milk or calling them super power up peas instead of, just regular sweet peas. It makes a difference in the way that people think about product. And, even those just little shifts of having that white milk in front of the chocolate milk and the amount of change that you saw overall, it's incredible what we could do in such a short period of time if we really paid attention. And I think some of it is just laziness, and the other side of it is that there's so much resistance to change. So I feel like we have a long way to go, but it's possible.
You're definitely part of a larger movement that in some circles is referred to as conscious capitalism.
Absolutely.
And one of my mottos, one of my bylines, at least in the business world, is making integrity profitable. And really what you're talking about is that there are very simple boots on the ground interventions or changes that can be made. And you gave a couple of examples of that can alter the consciousness of the consumer, not in a manipulative way, but in a way that brings them back to their fundamental human nature. Because what you're really referring to is the 1950s version of the American dream that was installed after World War II. And it was installed for some very interesting reasons, and I don't want to get into those right now, but it led to a redefinition of the pursuit of happiness as being excessive consumption. And in order to make that version of happiness happen, we had to create, or the business world felt like it had to create demand for products that people didn't necessarily need and things that actually would end up being harmful to us individually and collectively. And so what you're also referring to is what I refer to as the unholy alliance between the illness producing industry and the symptom control industry, which is the portions of the food industry and the portions of the healthcare industry that are fundamentally corrupt. And underline the word portions, because not everyone in those industries is corrupt, but the corruption is where you have people that are pushing illness creating foods and other substances, other environmental toxins, and then people in the healthcare industry who are inventing interventions that control the symptoms that those illness creating foods produce so that people can remain on those illness creating foods essentially for the rest of their lives through symptom control. And that is a perversion of the food industry and a perversion of the healthcare industry. So that unholy alliance between the corrupt sectors of both of those industries is part of what your North Star is about making changes with. Am I capturing that accurately?
Wow, I'm overwhelmed because you captured not only correctly, but I guess I would push back and ask, why is this not something that we can shift in a dramatic way by just having the realization of this knowledge?
The reason it's hard to shift is because of the power of propaganda. And what I mean by propaganda is best captured in a capsule, an encapsulated way, because I want to make sure we cover the other topics we want to cover today. But the encapsulated version is captured by a definition of a term that the father of modern public relations invented 100 years ago. That father of modern public relations, his name was Edward Bernays, and the term he invented was manufactured consent. And what manufactured consent is manipulating people into supporting product, services, causes, or candidates while thinking they're doing that out of their own free will. And what that creates is spells. People are under a spell. In order for a spell to work, one has to not know that they're under it, because the moment someone starts to recognize they've been under a spell, the spell starts to break.
And I'd love to just jump in. You hit on a very good point when you started talking about this, Rache, which is the dopamine effect. And we're seeing the manipulation of that dopamine effect spreading beyond food and consumption things into social media, into, gaming and all of these things. And one of the things that also happened at this time when mass consumption was being indoctrinated into our culture was that those companies were becoming very large and very powerful and able to moat this abusive, unethical treatment of the consumer with legal protections, with financial protections, with a government that really has an unspoken agreement to not thoroughly enforce or actively enforce antitrust laws. And so you've got these massive power centers that have huge protective moats around them. And it's very hard to break those down when they're keeping the people happy. What I love about what you're doing is you're getting back down to the community and the person level. And I'm gonna, I wanna bring us back to talking to you and say, tell us more about your organization and the way that you're providing financial means to small startups to give them a little bit of cushion and protection against the behemoths that can underprice them and, undercut them and compete them out of business.
Oh, thank you for bringing that back, because I think this is, first of all, Dr. Gruder, I want to spend more time with you. So this is very interesting to me, and I'm fascinated by the overarching topic.
We'll do it.
One thing that I noticed when I went west this year, and I've been in years past, but this was obviously the largest this year, 60,000 attendees, 3,000 businesses presented their products. And as I looked around at these people who had limited knowledge of business and limited knowledge of production or the food industry, they were just setting out on their life's path. It was almost like looking at a sea of graveyards in front of me. And I'll tell you why. In 2016, I joined the venture capital movement in California. And what I saw was a gross expansion of excess capital in a market that could not sustain it. It makes a lot of sense when you're looking at 30 times returns plus that you're going to see businesses grow and succeed when there is limited overhead and an opportunity to produce a product that is going to be scalable without, high COGS and low margin. When you start to look at some of the businesses that were getting invested in between 2016 and today, those businesses are like food companies that probably have a long lead time to market. They're new and novel ingredients in some cases that are getting tremendous investment, and the market is just simply not ready for it. So that was my thesis, if you will, when I couldn't finish closing the round that I had during COVID. And so we moved back east to Connecticut. I was broken from the experience of just being in California with little kids during the pandemic. And I started looking around, and what I realized is that Connecticut's a really closed system. So I decided to join Connecticut Innovations nonprofit arm. It's called CT Next, and they provide a nonprofit support system to entrepreneurs who want to join. There's a whole host of other issues associated with that. Connecticut Innovations has $300 million venture capital fund for the state of Connecticut. They invest in businesses cross-sector, mostly businesses who are going to have presence in Connecticut. And so when I joined this nonprofit arm, what I realized is these businesses really weren't being supported with the tools that they needed to be set up for success. And that led me into lending. The credit markets are an interesting place to be for small businesses. And most businesses think, okay, we need to do an angel round, we need to raise a Series A, we need to move on to X, Y, and Z. And I would say, hey, guess what? You have 1 hour in a day. Do you want to focus on selling your product for revenue, or do you want to focus on selling your business to give it away? You've got two options. And as a small business in today's economic climate, it's my job as somebody who wants to support entrepreneurs who are just starting out for the first time and educating them about their options. So debt is a scary term. Credit, this is an entirely different system and market that's out there. It's also not that accessible to small to medium-sized businesses. Typically, you can't just walk into a bank and get a line of credit for your business unless you have cash flow. And that is true for us as well.
Especially in this market.
Especially in this market. So I can really recognize why it hasn't been used as a tool the way it should be. But at the end of the day, if you're going to set up a business and get started, the first and easiest way to get started is not actually selling your vision to then ultimately sell your business equity and be diluted. It's actually to sell your product and earn enough revenue and then be able to kind of get yourself into the next step, which would be some version of credit. In my case, we start with businesses that are about 5 million in top line revenue. We will do lower, and we provide them with a very different style of lending. So you might tell me that you need $2 million. What we're going to say is, what are your milestones? And let's work backwards from there. And we help them kind of build forward from that lens.
I love that. It's so similar to the way that we've been talking to business owners. And, we do support capital raises, but one of the first things that every single one of our advisors will tell a business owner is we want to protect your equity. So we're going to look at all the options, and we're going to see if you need to sell and what's the bare minimum you need to sell, so that, you can always protect your equity. And I think it's great that there are more people out there that, one, are willing to help business owners protect that equity, but two, giving them other financial options, because you're right. Banks are really hard for young businesses. Even the SBA has some impossible hurdles for a small startup to climb. And so, really, my hat's off to you for taking your vision and using it to promote this young, privately held business ecosystem. I think that's great.
Absolutely. If I can, did you want to make another point, Jason, before I jump in?
No, I was just rambling.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. So I love where this is going. And for the benefit of our listeners, Rach, I'd like you to say just a little bit more about your approach. What sets your approach to credit financing, debt financing, apart from the bad reputation that venture capitalists have in certain sectors because of certain venture capital groups, not all of them, and they're referred to as vulture capitalists, right? And your model is not that. So say just a little bit about what makes your approach to debt financing or credit financing ethical and helpful to companies rather than putting them at risk of being taken over.
Great question. Okay, so first, I think it's an industry specific thing. So just to clarify my point, like a SaaS company is a great example of a business that should remain in the venture capital space. Now, if you're starting to get runway and you think that you can go to capital, like credit advisors, that's great, you should. But in most cases, you can stay in the realm of venture because you're going to see those big 10 times plus returns. The businesses that we work with are in the 2 to 5 times return place. What we started noticing a couple of years ago is that businesses were being unwound from venture capital firms. So like, 1 in 10 businesses would succeed. They needed to close the fund. So what you had to do is actually extract out those other 9 companies and figure out what to do with them. Well, those are great ideas. They're viable businesses. They're, family businesses in some cases that really just still want to see their product produced. And what the best thing for us to do is actually recap them and figure out a way to make them survive. So the way that we approach this business community is we lead with empathy. So empathy is one of our core tenets and values. And we always say, like, if you could cry, we'd probably give you more money. Just kidding. But really, it's that you have come to us and recognized that you can't do it all, that you are a lone ranger, you have limited resources, you need friends in the space, you want people to support you and surround you. And while we don't have all the ideas, we have a huge and extensive network of people that we can try to help you with. So we ask the companies that we're lending to be super open, honest, and transparent. We work backwards from what their goals are, their milestones that they intend to meet, and then we figure out together a payment schedule that makes sense for them. Obviously, it is a math game. Like ultimately, you have to be able to have enough revenue to be able to pay back the debt that you're taking, but we can help show you a way to get there. And one of the things that we're doing that I think is very unique with Superstruct, so Superstruct is the consulting arm of StarStrong Capital, which is our capital provider. And as part of that, we will kind of do an overall business assessment of where you are, a health check, if you will, of the business. And then we can underwrite you for the cost of whatever it takes to help fix some of the problems that you are working through as a direct line to some of our advisors that work in that area. So that's a unique model, I think, than most other businesses that are in this realm. So we have this great network of advisors, and we figure out a way to like make sure that you can get where you're going and ultimately be able to open up the door to additional capital by that growth.
This is so integral to what you're doing, right? First off, you're looking at the finance industry and you're saying, hey, look, everybody says that financing these low yield young companies, it can't happen. You can't make money doing that. This is a recipe for everybody to be disappointed. And you're saying, no, that's not true. You just have to be smart about it. So I want to first get you to talk about how your credit and equity facilities foster success in such a low margin, high risk environment. And then I'd love to get into this, I think part of the secret sauce that you have is having this Superstruct component, right? Because it's not just handing them money and saying good luck, it's handing them money and help. And so I think that I'd love to hear more about both of those, because this is in many ways revolutionary. And the world, especially the finance community, has to understand that there are recipes to make these things work. And you're doing
Let's say that I hope. So we are 4 years in and we are doing well. I will say the default level right now this year is higher than we'd like it to be. But instead of just letting the companies default, we figure out ways to work with them and maintain their asset class. So we maintain their assets within their purview so that we're not actually having to take over their business. We did take over one business, and in my opinion, it was not the right move. So now we're trying to figure out something else to do with it. Sometimes businesses are going to fail, and that's absolutely fine, but it's just like a marriage. You just have to keep working at it. So my opinion is that when you look at, so first of all, from an actual percentage, we are around a 9% monthly return. We're at 14.5 IRR, which I feel pretty good about. I think that number is increasing because we are in a position right now where capital markets are challenging and high, so we can charge more for our capital. We do try to not cannibalize the business in the process. So again, it becomes this math toggle, whether it's at the beginning or the end, that we're getting a success fee or figuring out the right place to insert the brokers, et cetera. But we're competing against people who are charging an MCA price. So if you look at these MCAs who are in the market, we're charging anywhere from, let's call 25 to 35%. They're really starting to hit more of an equity-based position. When you typically think debt, you're looking at around, let's call it a 15% interest rate. When you think equity, you should be looking in the 30%, 35% interest rate, even though it is going to be based on the amount of money that's returned. It's also, you are taking a risk and a liability on for your company. So you should be thinking about that return value. You're also giving away a percentage of your business, but in addition to that, you are paying more ultimately to get that free cash at the beginning. So it's something to just think about you as a business going into it. So to answer your question, it is not always with strings attached. We would say 30% of our portfolio needs help. The other 95% or whatever, 90% are doing quite well, and they're handling everything in stride on their own very well. And then we have a series of businesses that really do need, like, not just hand holding, but they really need structural change. And that's where we start to really take a much deeper look at those businesses and bring in new CEOs or help to support them in a more structured way. So that was kind of, I think, the first answer to your question. The second answer is, as we go forward, and the way that we think that we're going to build this is by developing what I would call more of an ecosystem, where we actually have one central thesis. We have one leadership, one distribution channel, one logistics and amplification department that all sits within the same wheelhouse. And then we add to that a arm of brands that all can use those shared services. And so what we're seeing right now, as I mentioned, I looked out across the landscape of 3,000 companies at Expo, and I was like, wow, let's say 2/3 of these companies aren't going to be here next year. What would be great is to actually figure out a new place to put them. So there are a number of businesses working like I do in credit, and they're recapitalizing in an equity fashion, but with an idea called orphan funding. And one of the ways that we think we can do it is by actually saying to the founder through an assessment, what are your strengths? What are the things that make you get up in the morning? What are the things that you love to do? You have a product, you probably have enough earned revenue that we can take your product and put it into a common co-packer, put you on a common brand platform, and then you can still do the things that you love to do and benefit from the overall ecosystem. So I don't think in all cases that founders get into this and think, oh my God, for the rest of my life, I'm going to be doing this. And somehow they end up in it for a long time. I often think that a founder should have the ability to step back for a second and have an option and say, hey, you know what? I love my brand. I did it. It's a baby. I want it to fly now. Is there an alternative for me to kind of nook it into something else? It's very similar to like a private equity model, except that in this case, they still run their business and they have debt to the overall ecosystem structure, but they are being able to be removed from a position that they may or may not be great at.
Marvelous. Well, I love everything that you're saying. It's very aligned with Blue Sky's values and with Jason's and my personal values as well. And so this is very exciting. So part of what you are doing is something that you've branded as a sprint calendar. And maybe you can say something about that. And as you do that, I just want to note for our listeners, your last name. How'd that happen? Your last name is Brand, and you're doing all this wonderful branding stuff.
So it's a little embarrassing, but I did not love my husband's last name, which was Uchtman. Not a huge fan, and my maiden name was Baird, and he did not like my maiden name. So my requirements had to be 5 letters and begin with a B, and they're not that many names that begin with a B and are 5 letters. So we ended up with Black or Brand as the options, and essentially did a thumb war to make the decision. And
wow.
I love this story. And, I want to interject 2 quick anecdotes because I think that last name stories are so much fun. When I was in my young 20s, I was dating a girl and we were checking into a hotel. And as we're checking in, the lady checking us in looked at the girl I was with and she's like, "Are you guys married?" And she says, "No." And she's like, do you realize if you marry him, you're going to have that for a last name?
That is so awful. What a terrible person.
Yeah, cracked me up. But
Oh
and then
my.
I have another friend, well, acquaintance, that they had the same situation you did. Neither of them liked the other's last name, so they renamed themselves McCool.
Cool. See, I'm gonna tell you, like, the good news is there's a story there, right? Like, so it becomes fun. But that is hilarious. Cool.
And you may not, you might not know this, but back in the 1950s, there was, and early 60s, there was a relatively famous folk singer whose last name was Brand. His name was Oscar Brand.
Really? Well,
Yeah.
it's funny is people ask me all the time if I'm connected in some way to Russell Brand, the comedian. And I'm
Yeah.
like, he's British and he's like, he's dark skinned by comparison to me. So it's always funny when people ask me those kinds of questions. I'm like, really? Yeah, it's kind of funny. No, I love last name stories. It's hilarious.
That's sweet. Ah, wonderful. So tell us about this particular branding aspect of what you're doing called the Sprint Calendar.
Yeah, so this is something that came out of lots of discussions. So I have this visual, which I'm happy to share, and you guys can post with the podcast, but it looks like a stair that you're going up, but they're angled stair steps. So angled in both directions. And it's very slight. So let's call it a 15-degree angle of sorts, where you're always in this motion forward. When you think about venture capital financing, typically the way that it works is they give you a huge tranche and you rocket ship, and then you kind of peter down, and then they get you another huge tranche of capital and you go back up because you're buying your business until you've hit that opportunity zone. With debt, the opportunity is that because you're going to be in a situation where you're non-diluted in most cases, and also you have the opportunity to really hit the point of break even on a regular basis. You should be thinking about that as you go into it. So it is a stair and you are growing at a much steadier and slower rate. But we think about this in 3-month periods with 2 6-week sprints. The first 6-week sprint is an acceleration up the step. And then immediately following that acceleration, at the 6-week point, you stop the spend and you rebuild to hit your point of break even. One of the suggestions that I've made to the way that we handle lending is anyone that goes through this model, the idea would be at the end of that break even point, we would actually have your interest and principal payment due at that point before you accelerate again. So you actually get to have the benefit of the system working for you in a totally different manner. We have not yet tried that, but I'm really excited to see what actually happens. So this idea of a sprint calendar, let's say, is built into this overall 24 to 36 month payback calendar. And you have milestones associated with each period of time. During each of those 3-month milestone periods, we can really look at, well, what are you trying to accomplish within that? And if you do a good enough job and you hit that point of break even quicker, one idea is actually that we could discount your interest payments, and actually have some reward as part of that. So we're starting to figure out models of how this might work and support the rest of the ecosystem as we grow. But I think if everyone were to imagine even your own lives and you think about your spend calendar with your families, most of the time we overspend and then we pull back and we hit that point of break even, or even again, get into the cash flow positive space. And then we hit that like threshold where we're accelerating. So it's a very typical way of creating a spend report. And I think we should all kind of think about it as a way to build our businesses. It builds a strength, which is exciting to me.
Yeah, I think this is great. If you think about one of the reasons that standard capital and credit facilities fail businesses, it's because of straight line amortization, right? And so you're giving them some fiscal flexibility in their working capital with this model. But, as the doctor will tell you, there's a lot of good science that says that 90 days is about as long as a team can maintain focus. And so with this 90-day calendar that you have, you're resetting the rudder every time and keeping them back into focus. So on both the cash flow management side as well as the strategic focus side, this is really great. And I love that you're incorporating that into your credit model.
Yeah. And what I'll add to that is that what you just described, Rach, is the first model for debt financing that I've ever run across that I consider to be ultimately ethical. It is a profoundly ethical model because it is responsible debting that is stair-stepped, and that with each step, you come back to break even so that you're not going into the next step carrying debt from the prior step that will threaten to pull you under as you take the next growth step.
And no, so I think the part, since we haven't really seen this in action yet, Dr. Gruder, I think one of the elements that we can work together on, which would be exciting, I think, with the support of Blue Sky, is what happens if you do hit that that point of break even and you've not yet been able to really get to break even. Like, so you're at the end of your 3 months and you've not yet gotten to break even. What happens? Do you keep muscling through? Do you keep pushing? Do you have some kind of an extra reserve available that you could potentially use in that moment? Because we know that things happen, right? So there always has to be also that element of no surprises. You know, COVID happened, no one was ready for it, and credit was really available and supported to a lot of businesses. If you keep going for that period of time with no return on that capital, it's really, really challenging for your business. So we have to come up with measures that benefit the business at every stage. And that's one that I have not thought through yet, and love your thoughts.
Beautiful.
And that's something that we actually spend a lot of time on, because, you know, what we do strategically is we look at the exit and we back to the front, just like you do. But our exit is all predicated on risk ratings, right? So we're always looking at the risk. And what we do when we set off on our objectives and key results for our 90-day sprints is we do pre-mortems on it. So we say, okay, assume this failed. What got in the way? And that gives us the ability to start thinking through, where are the major risk elements? What are the things that could throw a monkey wrench in this, and start to have proactive resolutions to the things we think are the most critically viable risk elements.
Oh, no, I think that's so interesting. So I wrote that down, and I feel like there's something there that we can really unpack together.
The other thing is, you know, if you're watching, if you know which KPIs are integral to your success factor and you're watching those every single week, you can be proactive. You can know if you're starting to slip from where you need to be. And, you know, the last thing you want to do is be at day 90 and realize you missed the mark. It's so much better to be at day 45 and say, hey, I'm missing the mark. We need to figure out how we, you know, gain momentum, or we need to regroup now and figure out what's reasonable and viable.
I know that we can talk about this among the three of us for hours upon hours. And I think we're at a point, unless there are any other crucial statements or points that need to be made, I think we're at a point in the episode where it would be good to turn our attention to what the takeaways are from this episode. So are you both in agreement about pivoting over to that?
Absolutely.
Super. So let's start with you, Rache. In light of what we've covered in this episode today, what are the takeaways that are most important to you for our viewers or listeners, depending on how they're watching or listening to this, take away from this conversation?
Well, I'm going to ignore my North Star, which is not typical for me because I have so many in there that are takeaways that I think will be distracting to the rest of this conversation, because it was fascinating for me and I learned a lot. The true takeaway for me is figuring out that pivot. And that's something I haven't really thought about yet. So it's making sure that I manage to my 3-month window and my 3 months in, and ensuring at every stage I am thinking more on the your post-mortems. I really love that, so that you can figure out the pivot moments that you need to make at every single stage. So for me, that's the biggest takeaway.
Beautiful. How about you, Jason?
I think for me, the thing that's getting me excited through this whole conversation is this concept that this community stewardship is not only possible, but it's, you know, it's capitalistically viable. And the idea that, you know, you're bringing all of these small businesses together to form a community where all the boats can be lifted by the tide. And I love the fact that you're out there making altruism in many ways and empathy commercially viable. So thank you for that.
And beautifully said. And what I would say as the kind of the overarching takeaway for me is that this conversation is reinforcement of something that Buckminster Fuller was very adamant about, which is that there are more than enough resources available for success to happen, for humanity to flourish. So the takeaway for me from this episode is that scarcity, in fact, is an illusion, that there is an abundance of resources that, if well tapped into and well selected first before tapping into them, can ensure the flourishing of a business rather than the implosion of a business. And that whole abundance thinking rather than scarcity fear is really crucial in terms of mindset pivots, not only for society in general, but for the business world in specific.
Wow.
Reachers for that.
Yes, big one. I love that.
Awesome.
I have a tall order to fill now, so I'm a little overwhelmed. I'm very excited.
Well, actually, that's the way a goal ought to be. Goals should be audacious and scary. BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. And so you've got that. And blessings to you for that. Bring it on, bring it out, because the world is thirsty for it.
And you've got a community of friends and fans who want to help you on your road to success. So
yes, and I think Blue Sky is going to be pivotal to that. So I'm very excited about our partnership.
Likewise.
Mm-hmm. Any other final comments before I do our sign off?
No, well, yes, I have a million, but I'm going to follow up afterwards about these spells. We're going to squash them.
All right. Well, good. Then on behalf of Rache Brand and Jason Tuzinkowicz and myself, we thank you for listening to this marvelous episode of Boosting Business Value. And we invite you to click on the subscribe button so you can be notified immediately when we release future episodes. We also look forward to reading your thoughts and questions and topic suggestions and other requests in the comments section at the bottom of each episode's page. All episode pages are available through blueskyadvisors.net/podcast. And lastly, we invite you to take advantage of Blue Sky's free surveys for gauging your business health more accurately. Each includes real-time feedback and recommendations. And so go ahead and visit blueskyadvisors.net today and get started.
Thanks so much, Rach. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, guys. This is so awesome. I appreciate the time.
That's all for this episode of Boosting Business Value. May your new learning result in the smoothest and most profitable exit strategy for your business. With the right knowledge and guidance, the sky's the limit to what you can do. Do not miss an episode by subscribing to the show. And if you want to learn where your business currently stands, we also have free key opportunity assessments. Find all of them at blueskyadvisors.net/podcast. Thank you for joining us. See you on the next one.